Well, you wouldn't begrudge the Prime Minister enjoying a beer, would you? Anthony Albanese was photographed in Vietnam at the weekend, throwing back a cold one. And why not? Diplomacy's hard work and Vietnam is a hot country. But not everyone was impressed. A journalist at the Daily Mail went with the headline, "Aussies furious, Elbows beer drinking beyond a joke." The Prime Minister had posted a photograph of himself on Twitter, chugging a beer in Hanoi. The problem is all of us are here, struggling with the cost of living and a divisive argument over the Constitution. And of course, photographs of Albanese drinking beer remind us of, that 3 days at the Australian Open tennis where he spent time drinking beer, having spent just 3 hours in Alice Springs dealing with the crime spree. And all of that after he told us when running for election that if we voted for him, he would be on the job 24/7, no distractions.
If I'm Prime Minister, I won't go missing when the going gets tough or pose for photos and then disappear when there's a job to be done. I'll show up, I'll step up, and I'll work every day to bring our country together.
Show up, step up, and Caleb, drink up. That's Elbo's plan.
So what? The man had a beer while he was overseas. I mean, he is the Prime Minister. I know he's taken a lot of overseas trips, but he is the Prime Minister. Part of his job is to rep us overseas. And if the bloke has a glass of beer, who gives a rat's?
It's the double standard. Remember, he
What double standard?
The big deal about ScoMo, when ScoMo was on holidays while there was a bushfire, which
That's
ScoMo went on holidays
completely
before
different.
the bushfire. Elbo made a big deal about that, and now he's getting what he created.
But what's that got to do with
That is
it?
completely different. You can't draw that comparison. The country was burning and ScoMo was like, I'm off to Hawaii, have fun with that.
ScoMo went before the fire.
I don't hold a hose. This is just a guy who is on the job. He is on the job in Vietnam having a beer. I mean, we have ample footage of so many of our prime ministers throwing back a beer. In fact, in Hawke's day, this was almost a prerequisite for the job. How can we forget this footage of him sculling a beer? There he goes. And this is in his older years, as you note. There were plenty of times in his younger years he'd do similar. But honestly, what do these misery guts want? Because if you're a world leader, according to them, if you follow their line of reasoning, you don't get to have a single sherbet unless all is right with the world.
I agree with you. The problem is Elbo started this. They went so hard on ScoMo.
No.
Playing when it comes back.
It had nothing to do with having a beer.
Exactly. He never went hard on ScoMo for having a cocktail while he was in Hawaii. It's the fact that he didn't come back when the country started burning. He could well have had a drink on the plane when he was coming back to the country, and that would have been perfectly fine. I just don't get the argument. How far have we fallen as a country if an Aussie bloke can't have a beer without people complaining about it
I'll be happy when Elbo
anymore?
has a beer when I get my $275 electricity reduction.
So that's the rules. No beer until you get your...
Explaining why people are ticked
My
off about
life
this.
is perfect, says almost
Yours must be a
26
misery.
million
This is why
Australians.
people are
The
annoyed
Prime
with
Minister
Elbo.
can't have a beer.
He's
It
going
doesn't
off
even make sense. And
behaving
you
like
do
he's
realise...
great while everyone else is struggling.
You do realise that it won't make a jot of difference to your or anybody else's life whether he does or doesn't have the beer.
I know. I'm just saying this is why people are annoyed.
No, it's a narky...
Well, they're dumb to be annoyed, quite clearly.
It's a narky tall poppy syndrome streak in this country, I think. The same happened when Scott Morrison, there was a photograph of him having a beer at the footy. There was stuff a few years ago, or more than a few years ago now, about Tony Abbott sculling a beer in a pub because there was a football team in their local football team. They see him in the pub, they've asked him to come and give a G-up speech to the boys, and then they've given him a beer and gone, skol, 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 and he's done the right thing and had a beer. I mean, big deal. If a political leader can't have a drink without being criticised, why on earth would you go into politics? I mean, they've got to be superhuman. they can't even enjoy a beverage to get through what is a very difficult job.
They've got to stop playing this gotcha game with the other guy if they don't want it to be played against
But
them.
it wasn't a gotcha that had anything to do with alcohol. I just think that you can't draw any lines of parallel between those two.
Can you tell that James Macpherson's the only bloke on this table who, until a few months ago, had not had a drink, never let alcohol pass his lips until his 50s.
Now we can't get it off him.
With you.
Yeah, I know. We're teaching him. Mate, he's come to work in the media. We're teaching him how to drink. It's a prerequisite.